It is Saturday, July 30th, 28 days until college football, and you're watching Right on Cue College Sports. That's right, you're watching Right on Cue College Sports. I am your host, Tyson Quiller, and thanks for joining us. Appreciate all your support. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share this content with people you think might find it interesting. We're doing our best to try and pump out these conference previews ahead of the college football season, to maybe try and equip you with more knowledge of players, more knowledge of trends, maybe give you an edge if we're looking at some of those win total betting or even head-to-head matchups. The first couple of weeks, it's really difficult for Vegas to set those lines because there's so much turnover, so much turmoil. But anyways, thanks again for checking us out. Today we will be diving into a preview of the Pacific 12 Conference. Yeah, that conference. You may have heard some news out of there recently. Let me just start right here. This is a conference that has really been kind of slipping off into obscurity for years. They haven't had a team make the playoffs since Washington did in 2016. The conference hasn't had a team finish the season ranked in the top 10 in the last 2 years. The two teams that made the conference championship game last year, Utah got boat raced at the Rose Bowl, finished outside the top 10. Their opponent, Oregon, finished in the season ranked number 25 in the country. This is, for all intents and purposes, not really, it's kind of a tweener between Power 5 and Group of 5 conference. And this is a conference my team is in. This is the conference I support. I'm giving you the reality check right here, okay? Every team in the conference last year, every single team in the conference last year had at least 4 losses on the season. That's pretty bad. But there has been a lot of interest in the conference this offseason. First of all, obviously, the Pac-12 and the Mountain West Conference, kind of a quirky thing, decided that they're going to do away with the division models, and they're going to basically run their conference like the Big 12 does. Top 2 teams at the end of the year will play each other again, likely for the conference championship. Most of the off-season storylines, though, were driven, obviously, by USC hiring Lincoln Riley away from Oklahoma, and all of the portal activity with the hopes that USC might become relevant again. Let me digress for a second here. Just remember now, okay, we're being told all of this stuff about USC, and boy, if you don't think they're going to make the playoff, if you don't think they're a legit national title contender, then you're just a hater. Bro, they went 4-8 last year, okay? I'm not a hater for thinking they won't make the playoff. You're a psycho for thinking that they might make the playoff. They went 4-8 last year, all right? Let's pump the brakes. Let's be rational and realistic here. Anyways, back at it. Oregon just hired Georgia defensive coordinator Dan Lanning as their new head coach off of his national championship season. That was maybe one of the better defensive performances all year that we've seen in college football. And Washington just hired Kalen DeBauer from Fresno State, who has really shot up the coaching ranks like a rocket. Oh, and don't forget, again, Utah, coming off of that sensational performance, at least on the offensive side, in a close loss to Ohio State in the Rose Bowl. There's a lot of interest in the conference. How about some major transfer portal news? Interest there. Remember I mentioned, here's the 24/7 Sports transfer portal team rankings. USC leads the nation as they have added Caleb Williams, Mario Williams, Brendan Rice, Travis Dye. They've really added some more talent to the defensive side of the ball in April and May. Largely their improvements have been on offense. Oh yeah, and they also added, a day after the transfer portal was apparently supposed to close, the reigning Biletnikoff Award winner, wide receiver from Pittsburgh, Jordan Addison. SC, on the other end, though, did lose 5-star quarterback Jackson Dart to Ole Miss, along with 4-star tight end Michael Trigg. Their starting quarterback from last year, Keaton Slovis, transferred to Pitt, probably with the idea of playing with Jordan Addison, but not so fast, my friend. You may also notice that UCLA is at number 6. They picked up future pro Darius Masau at linebacker from Hawaii, and big Raekwon O'Neal at right guard. That dude is 6'4", 305. He's really going to help bolster their offensive line. Now UCLA did lose their 4-star cornerback Jay Shaw to Wisconsin. Just sort of scanning through here, you got Arizona State, Oregon, Washington, and Arizona. We're all in the top 3 of the transfer portal as well. Oh, yeah. And in case you forgot, or in case you've been sleeping under a rock, USC, a member of the Pac-12 or a previous version, Pac-10, Pac-8, Pacific West Conference, since 1922, and UCLA, a member since 1928, they're set to join the Big Ten on August 2nd, 2024. This conference unquestionably has had the worst leadership in all of college sports. Obviously, it started with Larry Scott, but George Kliavkoff has really not done a whole lot to rein things in. And I've been warning about this. Let's get into this sort of realignment discussion a little bit. I've been warning about this since the Pac-12 voted to cancel football in 2020, on August 11th, 2020. I know there was a lot of nerves, a lot of fear and whatever about COVID, but I mean, basically every other conference except for the Big Ten. I mean, you saw the SEC, the Big 12, and the ACC all marched forward with their seasons, had no major issues. You cannot afford to make a mistake like that. That set us on a course of financial deficits that inevitably led to USC and UCLA leaving. So this article that I would encourage you to check out, a guy, John Wilner, wrote in February of this year, detailing the degree to which conferences have, or this conference, Pac-12, has marched towards oblivion on the national stage. Now, the reason I go back to this article is because it's a lot of people saying, well, we didn't know, well, how could we have known? No, this was not unknown. This was being reported about in February, and somehow between February and last month, the conference did not do enough to keep USC and UCLA. So, anyways, for the Pac-12 ADs and the new commissioner, George Kliavkoff, to refuse to participate in the changing landscape of college sports, it was simply suicide. It just is. I've been trying to get this message out. You can't just sit around and say, well, we do it the right way, or we're better than that, or we're loyal to the conference. That's great. You're going to be loyal to a conference that has San Jose State and UNLV here pretty soon. Is that the conference you want to be in? So anyways, let's take a look at some of the conference distributions based off of this article, once again by John Wilner. I want to give him credit for this. You can see there are the last year, fiscal year 2021, conference distributions per member institution. And then here are the projections for this season and the projections for 2023 and 2024. And now here what we're looking at is these are the 4-year deficits from 2021 to 2024 that the Pac-12 member institutions are going to face against other conferences. So the average team in the ACC over the next 4 years is going to make $11.5 million more than the average team in the Pac-12. And you could see, I mean, average team in the Big Ten is going to make $115 million more than the average team in the Pac-12 over the next 4 years. I mean, it's insanity. So, so that's why you get stupid things like this. Here is our Big Ten alignment now, our geographical alignment now. And now here's our updated Pac-12 geographic alignment. One last thing I want you to look at, top 40 revenue-generating football programs in the country. Now, I understand the vast majority of this conversation has to do with television contracts, TV rights, viewership of big games, and that's a little more difficult to get into the weeds on. But you can see from this graphic right here that we have 6 teams in the Pac-12 who are top 40 revenue-generating football programs in the country. And they're just choosing to sit around, add San Diego State. I don't know what they're choosing to do. It baffles me. And my personal opinion is Colorado and probably Utah and Arizona State should have joined the Big 12 if they could make that work, because I think it's just a matter of time before Washington and Oregon join the Big 10. Now let's set that conversation aside. Okay, I know I got probably more than a few of you upset about that, but let's move on to a preview of this season, the here and now of the Pac-12 college football season to come. Some players to watch in 2022. Now I know this might shock you, but the best pure passer in the conference really is now your starting quarterback for the Arizona Wildcats, quarterback Jaden DeLara. The transfer from Washington State led the conference in touchdowns and was second in yards last year. They'll be playing from behind a lot, and so he'll be passing in kind of garbage time a lot. Look for him to put up some big numbers. We're all waiting to see what Caleb Williams can do at SC. In just 8 games last year, he threw for almost 2,000 yards, 21 touchdowns, just 4 interceptions. Pretty impressive, pretty controlled and measured. Don't forget about Dorian Thompson-Robinson at UCLA, and Auburn transfer Bo Nix is now at the helm of Oregon. But my favorite for Pac-12 Player of the Year this year, and I think he's a front runner right now, is Cam Rising at Utah. In 11 starts last year, he went 9-2, passed for over 200 yards 5 times, and rushed for over 50 yards 6 times. In that Rose Bowl game, he rushed for 92 yards. How about some non-quarterbacks to watch this upcoming season out of the Pac-12? The 3 running backs that you'll want to watch are Travis Dye at USC. He transferred from Oregon last year at Oregon. 1,200, almost 1,300 yards, 16 touchdowns. He also had 402 receiving yards. Zach Charbonnet at UCLA was a stud, over 1,000 yards, 13 touchdowns. And Tavion Thomas at Utah, 1,100 yards, 21 touchdowns last year on the ground. On the defensive side of the ball, Oregon's Noah Sewell was first-team All-Pac-12 last season at linebacker. He had 114 tackles, 4 sacks, 2 forced fumbles as a freshman. Utah defensive back Clark Phillips, too, had an outstanding freshman campaign. He had 61 tackles, a conference-leading 13 pass deflections, and 2 interceptions. He just buzzes around in the open field in the secondary there. And then you have Washington State's Ron Stone at defensive end. First team All-Pac-12 last year, 64 tackles, 5 sacks. He'll be on the field a lot because their offense is really, really going to struggle up there in Pullman. So how about we go ahead and we dive in. Let's start with a look at the Pac-12 North. And you can see right here how I have the breakdown, power rankings in the left-hand column, their record from last year in the right-hand column. You can see I'm still very high on Oregon. I see Washington and Stanford having bounce-back years. Oregon State I might be giving a little too much credit to, and I see Washington State just cratering based off of a lot of their off-the-field and off-season situations. But let's start here with the Oregon Ducks. The Ducks had the best recruiting class in the Pac-12, number 13 in the country, so this team is loaded with a ton of talent, but large variance in possible outcomes of this season. Between the coaching staff overhaul, a brand new quarterback in Bo Nix, and all of the skill players are pretty much sophomores. But these are power rankings, right? They're not how I think it'll play out on the field. So Bo Nix has found a new home. After starting 3 years at Auburn, he will have an O-line in front of him that returns all 5 starters from last year. But as I mentioned, pretty much all your skill players are sophomores. Byron Caldwell moves to replace Travis Dye at running back, who bounced down to SC. He did have 61 carries and 3 touchdowns last year. That's pretty limited usage. At wideout, Franklin, Thornton, and McGee each had fewer than 20 catches last year. A lot of unproven talent in the skill positions for this squad. It is going to be really interesting to see how quickly this offense can come along. The Ducks' defense, though, is still pretty stout. You did lose defensive line monster Kayvon Thibodeau to the NFL. You also lost a couple of really great players in the secondary, most importantly, Verone McKinley, who grabbed 6 interceptions last year. But the next generation has arrived, led by stud Noah Sewell at linebacker. This defense, too, has a ton of young talent. Trequez Bridges really came on strong at the end of the season at safety, securing 7 tackles in the Ducks' bowl loss to Oklahoma. At nickel, Jamal Hill was great in coverage, really, and you add Christian Gonzalez from Colorado to this already stacked secondary. The D-line is where you'll probably see the most drop-off because of Kayvon Thibodeau's absence. But the defense will carry this team, especially early because there's a lot of unproven talent on the offensive side. Now, the Ducks start the season at Georgia, effectively at Georgia. They say it's a neutral site game. It's in Atlanta, so that's at Georgia. The Dogs' defense had a complete turnover, but they are likely to be just as talented as last year. Georgia is, in my estimation, kind of arriving in that same class as Ohio State and Alabama, where they have 10, 12, 14 players go to the NFL and they just reload. I could see Georgia reloading on the defensive end in that way. There will be some drop-off, but if Oregon's going to hang, they really can't turn the ball over. Oregon then hosts BYU on September 17th. My numbers have BYU as a top 15 team in the country. That one will tell us a lot about who the Ducks are. Your toughest game in conference, you get UCLA, Washington, and Utah all at home before traveling to Oregon State. I don't see Oregon State as a real threat to the Ducks this upcoming year. Oregon could finish really anywhere from 10-2 to 7-5, given the youth and inexperience. Next team I have in the Pac-12 North is the Washington Huskies. Now, Washington, too, brought in a transfer upperclassman at quarterback in Kalen DeBauer's first year at the helm, that being Michael Penix Jr., who started at quarterback at Indiana the last 2 seasons. Now, he really burst onto the scene in the COVID year, leading the Hoosiers to wins over Penn State, Michigan, and Wisconsin that year. He does have a high ceiling, but what we saw last year is that he is just too loose with the ball and too slow moving through his progressions, as he threw just 4 touchdowns to 7 interceptions before injuries halted his season. That, too, is a lingering concern, his injury history. The Huskies will also be featuring another transfer in their backfield in New Mexico transfer running back Aaron Dumas, who averaged 4.8 yards per carry on 136 attempts last year. The Huskies will be starting 2 sophomores at left guard and left tackle in Nate Kalepo and Troy Fautano, which is really kind of less concerning for Penix because he is left-handed. So that's not really his blind side, so the vulnerability won't necessarily be there for him like you would typically think with inexperience or youth on the left-hand side of the offensive line. Just like Oregon, all of Washington's skill players are pretty much underclassmen. On the defense, the loss of Jackson Sermon at linebacker is big for the Huskies. Edufan Ulofushio and Carson Bruner will be your starting linebackers this season in the nickel formation. They both are very experienced and talented, collecting 69 and 51 tackles respectively last year. Freshman Kwao Pelahapa will be starting at D-tackle, and sophomore Braylon Trice moves from linebacker to edge for a pretty young defensive line. The Huskies did have the best pass defense in the country last year. Washington returns 3 starters in the secondary in Turner, Cook, and Hampton, and they brought in UC Davis transfer Jordan Perryman to kind of bolster that back end. Just like with Oregon, the defense is going to be asked to keep the Huskies in games until the offense kind of comes along. Washington will have 2 weeks to kind of get the offense clicking before they host Michigan State on September 17th. I do think Michigan State's going to be down a little bit from last year, but that's a very losable game for Washington. The rest of the schedule shapes up pretty favorably, though, at UCLA and at Oregon, but you don't get Utah this year. So I think that's a pretty good duck of Utah. This looks like a 9-3 on the top end, and really could maybe fall all the way down to a 5-7 if the offense can't get together. How about the Oregon State Beavers? This team was so eclectic last year, it's unbelievable. Wins over USC and Utah, but losses to Colorado and Cal. How many teams can claim that in the same season? Now, the Beavs starting quarterback Chance Nolan is back, but this team was very run-heavy last year, rushing for 212 yards per game. Stud running back BJ Baylor is gone, and you have 2 brand-new starters on the O-line. 2022's featured back is going to be the freshman Damian Martinez out of Texas. He was very highly recruited, but he is just a freshman. Trayshawn Harrison is a dangerous weapon in the passing game, but it just seems pretty clear their style of play isn't going to play to their strengths this season. You may notice a theme here. The offenses in the North are very unproven. Most of the firepower you're going to see in the conference this year will be coming from teams out of the Pac-12 South. On the defense, the Beavs return almost 80% of their production. Really, linebacker Avery Roberts is the only loss of the offseason of note. Omar Spates will be the leader on the defense at linebacker, and Kyrie Fisher had some pretty good reps last year for this talented 4 linebacker set. Sandberg, Shippen, and Hodgins are all upperclassmen on the D-line, but they are, a bit inexperienced. Jaden Grant headlines a pretty talented secondary. This is going to be all 3 of these top teams, similar story, unproven offensive commodities, but relatively stable defense. So we'll see how that all shakes out. The schedule is pretty tough for the Beavers this year. There's a very real possibility that Oregon State starts off 0-2. You then have a brutal back-to-back in September, USC and Utah. You do host Oregon at the end of the year with a chance to kind of play spoiler. I think there's at least 5 losses on the schedule here for the Beavs. How about California? Boy, is it possible that Justin Wilcox is just a Sonny Dykes redux. Are they the exact same person? In his last 3 years at Cal, Sonny Dykes had a win percentage of 48.1%. Under Wilcox, Cal's win percentage is 48.1%. Wilcox is definitely on the hot seat this year, I think. So Chase Garbers has graduated, and Jack Plummer transfers in from Purdue to start at quarterback. Now, Plummer has some real talent here. In the last 2 years, he threw for 15 touchdowns and just 2 interceptions on 70% completion percentage. Junior Damian Moore will start at running back. He rushed for a little over 500 yards, 6 touchdowns last year. Not a ton of production, but you will be starting 2 freshmen at wide receiver, and your third had just 1 receiving touchdown all of last year. With maybe the biggest pickup on the defense in the North, the Bears landed Washington transfer stud linebacker Jackson Sermon. They needed him, as they will have 2 freshmen with him in the linebacking corps. Cal also had a huge pickup in the portal on the defensive line, landing Utah transfer Xavier Carlton. The D-line is really going to be the strength for this team, but they will struggle against the pass, as you have 4 new starters in the secondary, 2 of which are freshmen as well. Just looking at the schedule, at Notre Dame, Washington, Oregon, at USC, at UCLA, I don't see them winning any of those. The game at Oregon State will determine if they finish 3rd or 4th in the North. I think the Bears will need to fight to get to bowl eligibility. How about Stanford? The Stanford offense has been a bottom 3 offense in the conference every year since 2015, except for the COVID-shortened year, which is a little bizarre. Last year they hit an all-time low as they couldn't get running. Last year they hit an all-time low as they couldn't get the running game going at all, averaging just 87 yards per game, which was 5th worst in the country. Now, David Shaw owes a huge thank you to Carl Durrell and Darren Cheverini, because if not for Colorado having the worst offense in college football in the last decade, probably, this might have been a bigger story. The Cardinals do have more stability on the offensive line this year, though, returning 4 starters in front of the returning starting quarterback, Tanner McKee. McKee has tremendous upside. But if you don't have any run game to offset or to get players to shift away, then he's going to be taking on a barrage of blitzes. And he's not super mobile. They do have a reliable tight end in Benjamin Urosek. He is back. He led the team in receiving last year at 653 yards. And Wilson, Tremaine, and Higgins are serviceable at the wide receiver position. It's E.J. Smith's turn in the backfield with Nathaniel Pete moving on. This offense will be improved, I think, but they are still limited in both passing and in running. On the defensive side, Stanford landed 4-star edge David Bailey on the recruiting trail to bolster a defensive line that will start 2 freshmen. DeMooney and Meason are both back at linebacker. They combined for 154 tackles and 4 sacks last year. This defense gave up 451 yards per game through the air last year. Just through the air. Okay? Defensive back Caillou Blue Kelly was second-team all-conference last year. But outside of him, I really don't see any improvement in the secondary. So if any of these offenses in the North can get the passing game going, Stanford's in trouble. Now, I do think Stanford will be better than last year as a team, but this schedule is just brutal. And I do believe that David Shaw is on the hot seat. You got at Washington, at Oregon, at Notre Dame, at UCLA, at Utah, and then you get BYU at the end of the year to boot. Stanford is a better team than Washington State, but because of this schedule, they may finish with a worse record. 4-8 is probably the ceiling for the Cardinals this year. And now we come to Washington State. Now, this program is just in complete disarray. They fired their head coach, Nick Rolovich, mid-year last year. He had a 4-3 record, a winning record. But because he refused to comply with a brand new state requirement that the state reversed literally less than a year later, he got the axe. With him went a few key pieces of the coaching staff as well. In the offseason, your star quarterback, Jaden DeLara, transferred to the worst team in the conference just to get away from this program. Jake Dicker now starts his term as head coach, and all of the hopes lay on the shoulders of Incarnate Word transfer Cameron Ward at quarterback. All of the weapons from last year are pretty much gone. 3-year starting running back Max Borghi and second-team all-conference receivers Travell Harris and Calvin Johnson Jr. are all in the NFL now. The Cougs will be starting a freshman at tight end, a freshman at wide receiver, and 2 freshmen on the offensive line. If not Colorado, Washington State will have the worst offense in the conference this year without question. Now, on the defensive side of the ball, the Cougs' two best players from last year, Jahad Woods and Justice Rogers, have both graduated. This leaves their linebacking core pretty much decimated. Travion Brown at the Mike position is going to be asked to do a lot. Washington State did come up with 15 interceptions and 14 fumble recoveries last year. I think that kind of covered up for some of their defensive weaknesses. This team has a long way to go if they're going to be competitive this year. Now we look at the schedule. The Cougs are going to lose bad to Wisconsin. Just ready yourself. I could even maybe see them losing to Colorado State on September 17th. That one could really kind of be a toss-up. And then I'm not sure that they win a single game in the conference. At Arizona on November 19th, maybe. But Arizona is much improved. They did great in the transfer portal this offseason. So, now that I've scared off all of the Washington State Cougar fans, let's move on to the teams in the Pac-12 South and see how we have the power rankings shaking out for them. You can see right here on the screen, Utah is really, my numbers show, the only really nationally relevant team out of the conference this year. Hopefully they can avoid the early season trip-ups like they had last year, and they might, they very well may be in the playoff picture come the end of the season. UCLA, I think, is a very talented team as well. Chip Kelly kind of rounding that program into a gear here in, I believe he's year 3 or 4. I'm obviously a little more tempered on USC. I do think Arizona is quite a bit better. It's almost kind of a toss-up between Arizona State, Colorado, and Arizona. You can see how closely their power rankings are there. So let's kick things off with the Utah Utes. Well, first-team all-conference quarterback Cameron Rising is back at the helm of the best, most proven offense in the conference. They know what they do, and they do it extremely well. Utah averaged 216 rush yards per game last year, and their 1,000-yard feature back, Tavion Thomas, has returned for his junior season. 2 of their 3 leading receivers were tight ends. Last year, both Brant Keithy and Dalton Kincaid are back. Both tremendous blocking tight ends, both tremendous receiving tight ends. You will see both of these tight ends playing on Sundays, maybe as soon as next year. The only question really will be replacing some of the losses on the offensive line, but they have done a tremendous job of recruiting over the years for the big uglies up front. On the defense, you had a complete changeover in the linebacking core. The team leader and anchor, linebacker first-team All-American Devin Lloyd, was drafted in the first round of the NFL Draft. You also lost your second leading tackler in Nephi Sewell. First-team All-Conference Mika Tafua to the NFL. The Utes picked up a major transfer, though, to try and replace some of that loss of production in Mohamoud Diabate from Florida, and that's really going to help kind of bolster that linebacking group. BYU transfer Devin Kafusi headlines a very impressive defensive line with 2 300-pound-plus D tackles, just really anchoring that. They're real run stoppers. The secondary is littered with young talent from Clark Phillips, who was second-team All-Conference as a freshman last year, to Cole Bishop and Malone Matalele. The Utes gave up only 195 yards passing per game last year. I see them bettering that mark this year. This defense is going to be stout, and the offense is going to be excellent. Listen, Kyle Whittingham is by far the best coach in this conference. I don't think there's a debate about it. The culture he has developed is sustainable, and the players he gets, they buy in and they play the right way, or at least they play as a team to succeed, as opposed to kind of this missionary situation or mercenary situation that you have at USC. They may not have the most talent, but they are definitely the best team in this conference. Utah will open things up at Florida. I give them the win there. They host a sneaky good San Diego State squad in Week 3, but I've got them starting off 5-0 when they head to UCLA. I think UCLA will likely be 5-0 as well. Could both be top 15, they could both be top 15 teams at this point. I mean, this could be maybe a college football game day location game. I think Utah will finish no lower than 9-3. They could go as high as 12-0, to be honest with you. I don't know if there's more than one game on their schedule that they won't be favored in. Now let's move on to that UCLA Bruins team. I know it hasn't happened as fast as everyone expected, but this team has gotten better and better each year under Chip Kelly. On the offense, you're looking at replacing first-team all-conference player Kyle Phillips at wide receiver and Greg Dulcich at tight end, but that may be a bit of a blessing. The Bruins saw most of their success last year in games where they rushed for over 200 yards, and in kind of the disappointing performances like losses to Arizona State and Fresno State, they were held under 200 yards rushing. I think it's a very simple formula for Chip Kelly, and it's working with this offense. With a mobile quarterback in Dorian Thompson-Robinson and an elusive speedster in Michigan transfer Zach Charbonnet behind 4 seniors on the offensive line, I think this is as close to the glory days of Chip Kelly that he had at Oregon that we've seen at UCLA. Like I mentioned, you bring in big Raekwon O'Neal, which is a huge addition to the offensive line at left tackle. You are, though, going to be starting a freshman at right tackle, so that could take a little time to round into shape, maybe get those bootlegs going out to the left. The Bruins added Jake Bobo from Duke to their receiving core. I think they've got enough talent as long as they play their style. On defense, though, they only return 57% of their production. Fixtures on the defense that fans have come to know and love, like Quantrez Knight, Mitchell Agood, and Quentin Lake, have moved on to the NFL. This defense will be starting a freshman at D-tackle and a freshman at defensive back. But Stefan Blaylock and Martell Irby return in the secondary, though, after playing most of the season last year, so they have a lot of important reps under their belt. And UCLA picked up former first-team All-Mountain West Conference linebacker Darius Masau from Hawaii through the transfer portal, who I think is really going to help them lock down the box. If UCLA can establish the run on offense, I think they can really shorten the game and the defense will be better rested. I think it's possible that UCLA might be the second best team in the conference. As for their schedule, like I mentioned, I think it's entirely possible that they could start out 5-0, setting up, like I said, a game in Pasadena versus Utah, possible college football game day. After hosting Utah, they have their bye week before traveling to Oregon. That's a tough 2-game stretch for them. They will get USC at home. I think the schedule sets up pretty nicely for the Bruins to pull out 9 or maybe even 10 wins in year 5 for Chip Kelly. And I think he's earned every penny of his contract if that's the way it plays out. Now we get to the USC Trojans, everyone's darling. Now they've certainly been making a lot of noise in the offseason, but they only returned 57% of their offensive production. This is a complete revamp with 7 new starters, 3 new offensive linemen. Caleb Williams threw for almost 2,000 yards and 21 touchdowns in 8 starts last year. He is a real dual threat, rushing for over 60 yards in 5 of those 8 games. He also scored 6 touchdowns on the ground. He's going to have weapons around him, too. I mean, your receiver room is just absolutely stacked. First, the Trojans returned Taj Washington and Gary Bryant, who are reliable kind of short route threats. Terrell Bynum transfers in from Washington. Obviously, you add Jordan Addison from Pittsburgh, who had 1,500, almost 1,600 yards receiving last year. Travis Dye transfers in at running back from Oregon. He's going to be the feature back behind what will be a relatively inexperienced offensive line. So kind of weapons everywhere, but can the O-line give them time to work? Can they get on the same page and communicate with each other? Like I said, I mean, this is really a mercenary core on the offensive side for USC. Now, the USC defense was, to use a word, atrocious last year, giving up 31.8 points per game. They gave up more than 40 points to the following teams: Stanford, Oregon State, and Utah. Oh, yes, and they gave up 62 to their crosstown rival UCLA. Only 1 returning starter on the defensive line. That's Tui Pulotu, but he is impressive, just as his name might indicate. 48 tackles, 5.5 sacks, 2 forced fumbles last year. The Trojans have been active in the transfer portal on defense as well, especially late in the transfer portal season. Former Auburn linebacker Romello Height and Alabama transfer Shane Lee are going to be starting in the linebacker core this season. I think they're both talented. Again, it remains to be seen how all this gels and meshes together. They also made a few moves in the secondary, picking up Mekhi Blackman, who's a young talent from Colorado, and Latrell McCutcheon from Oklahoma. I don't think those are as big of pickups as your linebackers were. The secondary is very young, though, but it does also return Xavier Alford, who secured 3 interceptions in kind of limited minutes last year. Ultimately, there are 5 new starters on the defense. There's just too much work to do, and the talent is mostly underclassmen. I think this team is a year away from really being a contender. I don't see them even winning their division. My power rankings have them as the 3rd best team in the Pac-12 South. Now, let's step back from the ledge. It's going to take some time for this team to mesh, so with so many new faces and completely new schemes, they will have one game to get that sorted out, kind of, because week 2, the Trojans are at Stanford, who beat them in LA 42-28 last year. Eek, yuck. Then they host a very good Fresno State squad, which I mentioned in our previous preview of the Mountain West. They then travel to Oregon State, who beat them in LA last year, also 45-27. In the second half of the schedule, you travel to Utah, to UCLA, and then in the season hosting Notre Dame. That's a tough schedule. This is a pretty talented team at USC, but the schedule is really tough. Can Lincoln Riley keep these young kids focused when they face early adversity? Remember, this was a squad that went 4-8 last year. I think their talent can get them to 7 or 8 wins, but I don't know how much more is attainable in that schedule. How about Arizona State? Well, this offensive group was really pretty much rocked in early March when their starting quarterback Jaden Daniels announced he was transferring to LSU. But in comes embattled Florida transfer quarterback Emory Jones. Emory Jones is a very mobile quarterback, leading the Gators in rushing last year. He is, however, very much a liability in the passing game. He threw 13 interceptions and was benched several times last year. You also lose second-team All-Pac-12 running back Rashad White and your 4 top receivers from last year. This offense, too, is having a complete facelift. Herm Edwards did pick up several under-the-radar skill position pieces for the offense. Running back Xavier Valade, I think people know I've been pretty high on him, from Wyoming. He has some really great top-end potential, but he's coming off of a down season last year. In the passing game, Arizona State picked up Missouri tight end Messiah Swinson and a wide receiver Cam Johnson from Vanderbilt. You have 3 new starters on the O-line. This offense is going to have some struggles this year. So, on the defense, the Sun Devils' defensive unit was second best in the Pac-12 last year, giving up just 20.9 points per game. 2 of the 3 stud linebackers are back. Kyle Soley and Merlin Robertson, who combined for 146 tackles and 4 interceptions last year. The sophomore Caleb McCullough will be asked to replace the big shoes left by Darren Butler at will linebacker, though, so we'll see how that kind of comes together for them. Miami transfer Nesta Jade Silvera helps bolster kind of an inexperienced defensive line. The secondary is a very new-look crew as well, so they could be really susceptible in the passing game if opponents can get kind of the deep ball going. I think the Sun Devils are going to be taking a step backward this year, to be honest, with so much turnover. Obviously, you had all of the off-season issues and investigations and stuff. I'm a big Herm Edwards fan. I think he just, he had some dudes on his coaching staff that were trying to cause issues for him, especially during the COVID season, and it's just created a lot of turmoil in this program. But add on top of that, you're facing really one of the tougher schedules in the conference. With a non-conference game at Oklahoma State, I'd be surprised if this team won more than 5 games this year. And now, that brings us to my team, the Colorado Buffaloes. Yes, the Colorado Buffaloes got completely gutted in the transfer portal this past offseason. It was horrendous and pitiful to watch, as we just got pilfered by vultures from all over the place, just plucking away any semblance of talent we might have had. If for those of you who listen to the Fan Section podcast, you might remember about halfway through the season last year, I gave out the warning: if you don't fix the quarterback situation, if you don't fix the offensive coordinator situation, all of your skill players are going to leave. Why would they stay to not have somebody who can throw them the ball, right? Well, sure enough, On the offense, promising young talents in running back Ashad Clayton and wide receiver Chris Carpenter left for Tulane and Texas San Antonio. The Buffs' top wide receiver Brendan Rice transferred to interdivision opponent USC. Their top running back Jarek Broussard transferred to Michigan State. The Buffs' best slot receiver Dimitri Stanley transferred to Iowa State. The offense was historically bad last year. In half of their games, the Buffs scored 1 or fewer touchdowns. The offense scored 0 touchdowns against Minnesota, Utah, and Cal. 102 quarterbacks had a better completion percentage than quarterback Brendan Lewis did last year. Oh, and he was also sacked 31 times. Well, coming into the 2022 season, there's a supposed real quarterback competition. I would hope so. But you know that Darrell has to move on from Lewis to the Tennessee transfer J.T. Shrout if it's even close. Lewis had just too bad of a year last year. The Buffs did fire their O-line coach and the offensive coordinator Darren Cheverini. New offensive coordinator Mike Sanford had 3 headline transfer pickups. Alabama grad transfer Tommy Brown at right tackle. This dude is massive, 6'7", 330, really going to help bolster that offensive line. I give that pickup an A grade in my book. Then you had the Baylor transfer wide receiver R.J. Sneed coming in. Sneed was the second leading receiver for the Bears squad that finished ranked number 5 in the country last year. I think this is a good replacement for the loss of Brendan Rice. I give a B grade here because, really, I mean, he's going to kind of be limited if no one can pass him the ball. And finally, you supposedly had picked up a very talented but under-the-radar running back from Sam Houston in Ramon Jefferson. Well, Jefferson has since decommitted, so that's an F grade. That moves Alex Fontenot back to the starter. He was the first-team All-Pac-12 preseason selection in 2020, but has really had limited production the last 2 years. That was before a hip injury forced him to sit out 2020, and we were all introduced to Jarek Broussard. In the receiving corps, other than Sneed, your 2 new starters are going to be Montana Lamonius Craig and Chase Penry. Both are sophomores who averaged fewer than 1 catch per game in their career. I believe this offensive line will be better, but the offense will likely really struggle again this season. You know, it was kind of an excuse, right, to fire the offensive line coach midway through the season, as if that was the only problem leading to this situation. It wasn't. So now we're going to have a better offensive line, but still a quarterback who can't do anything, and so it doesn't matter what talent we have around him. Really disappointing that they were not able to pick up anybody better than Shrout or Lewis in the transfer portal. And I mean, I'm talking there were 50 quarterbacks around the country that went into the transfer portal that were better than them, maybe more. And I know you're going to say, yeah, but the Buffs are known for their defense. Well, this group was second worst in the Pac-12 last year, giving up 420 yards per game. And I understand a lot of that has to do with just the anemic offense, pathetic 3-and-out punt, 3-and-out punt, just pathetic offense that we had last year. But that's still a bad defensive year. You lose all Pac-12 conference linebacker Nate Landman and Carson Wells to the NFL, and then the portal came calling. For the secondary, 3 young starters with great talent, Mekhi Blackman, Christian Gonzalez, and Mark Perry, all left for USC, Oregon, and TCU respectively. Now you would think the Buffs would be active in the portal trying to fill these massive holes. You would think that. But no! The Buffs did not sign a single defensive player of note in the portal. I think that's a real indictment on defensive coordinator Chris Wilson. Now, the defensive line should be pretty formidable with Terrence Lang, Jalen Sammy, and Naeem Rodman, but there are really only 3 other players on this defense that are proven at all. And that's Robert Barnes, the transfer from Oklahoma, Quinn Perry, who's going to be relied on to do almost everything at linebacker, and then obviously Isaiah Lewis at safety. A lot, and I mean a lot, is going to be asked of those players as the defense returns just 47% of its production. So brace yourselves, Buffs fans. This season could go south really fast. You start the season off at home against a TCU squad that I have ranked just 1 spot ahead of the Buffs in the power rankings. I mean, these are interchangeable, and it is at home. So I think this is a winnable game. But then you have Air Force. They're returning a ton of talent from a team that finished 10-3 last year. That's a loss. This schedule is pretty tough. I really only see 4 winnable games on there for this bunch. TCU at Arizona, Cal, and Arizona State at home. Arizona, by the way, did great in the transfer portal and is much improved. I'm looking at the Buffs probably going 3-9, and Carl Durrell probably needs to lose his job. And the final team we are going to preview here for the Pac-12 is the Arizona Wildcats. The Wildcats had a top 25 recruiting class in the country. I really think Jed Fish and Arizona also did surprisingly well in the transfer portal this offseason with 8 big pickups, headlined by Washington State transfer quarterback Jaden DeLara. DeLara, again, was second in the Pac-12 in passing last year. Almost 2,800 yards, 23 touchdowns. He's not real mobile, though, kind of your typical pocket passer. The Wildcats return a 300-yard running back in Michael Wiley and 300-yard receiver in Dorian Singer. The feature weapon, though, is going to be the UTEP transfer wide receiver Jacob Cowing, which was probably their biggest pickup in the transfer portal, outside of Jaden DeLara. The O-line is young and has 3 new starters. This could stall the offense from time to time. This offense is definitely, let me just be clear, this offense is definitely better than Colorado's. On the defensive side, only 63% of production is back. Christian Young and Jackson Turner are solid returning starters in the secondary. You have Keon Bars at nose tackle. He had 5 sacks last year. He can get up and break up runs and get into the backfield on occasion. But this defense is going to be starting 5 underclassmen. I mean, they're going to need Bars to be getting into the backfield and disrupting more if they're going to have a chance. This side of the ball is really going to be a liability for Arizona. I think they will lose their first 2 games at San Diego State and hosting a much improved Mississippi State team. But their next 3 are all winnable. North Dakota State, at Cal, and hosting Colorado. If they can hold things together through a kind of a brutal midseason stretch, the last 2 games are both winnable as well, I think. Colorado does have more talent, and that's what we're discussing here. But I wouldn't be surprised to see Arizona win 4 games and Colorado win 3. So here's one last look at our Pac-12 power rankings. You can see, I think there's a ton of talent and potential in the South. Utah, UCLA, and USC. I see Washington really kind of being the only formidable challenger to Oregon in the North. And with that being said, let's go ahead and let's take a look at some of the primetime games in the first couple of weeks of the season to mark on your calendar. Saturday, September 3rd, Utah at Florida. That's going to be a massive, massive game. Looking forward to that. I did mention the Georgia-Oregon game. They have that again marketed as a neutral site game. It is in Atlanta, so it's basically at Georgia. I think Utah beats Florida. I think Oregon probably loses to Georgia. That following Saturday, September 10th, Oregon State at Fresno State. I mean, that's a real measuring game for the Pac-12. Pac-12 needs Oregon State to win that. I think they likely lose that game to Fresno State. Then you've got Colorado at Air Force, a game that I'm probably going to be going to, even though I know Air Force is going to be beating Colorado. And then you have Arizona State at Oklahoma State. That one could be a really fun one to check out later on in the day on September 10th. So, like I said at the end of the last preview, give me your feedback. Did I miss anything? Am I way off base on anything? Maybe some more information you could provide to me that I can give out to everyone else and obviously give you the credit for. Feel free to give me your feedback right on QCS@gmail.com or hit us up at Twitter at right on QCS. Thank you for watching Right on Q College Sports. I am your host, Tyson Quiller, and we will get at you next time.